So, as part of today's discussion, we have Mike Cohen, who's an entrepreneur, operated a real estate company in Chicago for nearly 30 years. Initially was trained in technology and business information systems. But, like so many of us who either went to school in different ways, the bug got him at some point, and he went off to do his own business. More recently, he has worked with the small business development centers in Chicago, Oregon, and Phoenix. And most recently, he is doing consulting. He has expertise in funding, credit, business planning, and financial analysis. And he is the lead consultant to Startup Space, which is a company building a software application that helps manage local small business ecosystems. So Mike generously has agreed to join us and have a discussion about what small businesses can do during this time of COVID. We're going to talk about legal stuff. We're going to talk about funding, including government funding. Some of you may have loans, how to talk about loan forgiveness. Also do some speculation about what the future might hold. Congress has not yet passed a bill for more COVID economic relief, but signs are indicating that they will. And also go through some strategies that businesses can use in terms of adjusting their business model. One note that's important is that we have been alerted that there could be a power shedding that happens in Newark. If it happens, it's not expected to happen until 7 o'clock, but all of that is approximate. If the heat continues and everybody is using their air conditioner or swamp coolers, it could happen a little early. So that's the way it is, and we're just going to roll with it. The signal must get out. So I'm going to kick us off here with one of my current favorite meme: coronavirus, keep calm and carry on. And if there is a theme to these discussions that the Chamber of Commerce has been hosting, this is it. That's not to say that there aren't risks, that COVID is somehow not real, and that the risks are not real. They are real. The other part of reality is that economies need to continue, and you don't stop doing what you do. You find new ways of doing it. And that is the mindset that we at the Chamber of Commerce have adopted and are trying to help the businesses in Newark and the Bay Area continue on and continue to deliver value to their customers, and of course continue to gainfully employ so many of our community. So there are a few things to consider. Oh, and I should also mention, please, don't hesitate to interrupt us with questions. We hope for this session, particularly since Mike is here and he has this deep knowledge and he's very humble too. He's laughing at me, but I've known him for a little while. Please don't hesitate to chime in. I'm going to be trying to keep a tab on the chat, and if you can either use the raise hand function or directly put your question into chat, I'll make sure that we get to it quickly. So in terms of framing this discussion, one of the things we all understand is that we have to evolve or die. And over here on the right, I've got one of my favorite little comics where a dinosaur is looking at a sign that says evolve or die. And they faced a bit of a catastrophe as well. And those businesses that were able to adapt quickly to evolve were the ones that survived. The dinosaurs didn't survive. It's interesting to think and realize that at that time, the animals that survived were the smaller, more nimble, more adaptable ones, rather than the monoliths. And we've seen, due to technology in the last 25, 30 years, that kind of analogy is holding true. So we're going to talk about what can digital do for you, finance during COVID, new ways to monetize, how to rethink our operations, and possibly how to reimagine the customer experience. I got a note that there might be some audio issues. Is that a little better, perhaps? I hope so. So we're going to get going. So in terms of small business, and Mike, please chime in here with what you're seeing is working. What can digital do for you? So when you think about digital, a lot of small businesses are a little old school. Certainly phone, email, mailers, the value pack that comes in the blue envelope, I believe that typically I give to my 3-year-old daughter to play with and cut up and do whatever she does with it. That's a lot of what has been used traditionally. But currently, thinking about ways to integrate better into the e-commerce world, and not just kind of what people think about it, e-commerce, you know, Walmart, eBay, Amazon, of course, the, you know, 800-pound gorilla in the room, but also thinking about how you can use different types of digital media. I think we have Felix on. So Felix, please don't hesitate to chime in with any comments here, because I know you're a bit of a master at this. But how can we drive people to the business using social media, email, and viral marketing? So that those are things to consider. And within that, what you want to consider perhaps is digital micro transformations. So you don't have to change your whole business model. But if you don't have an app, can you pay $500 or $1,000 and get an app? And it may seem like a trivial thing, but once an app is installed and has permissions on the phone, it's a direct line to somebody who has opened their wallet to you before. And you can try to get them to open their wallet again or expand on that wallet. Now, in terms of getting access to digital marketing, perhaps somebody to manage your social media so that you don't have to, as a business owner, spend a ton of your time on that. What you could do is look at gig platforms. One of my favorites is Fiverr. I've used that a lot in my startup, where you can get different things done. It's not quite pure top-end professional quality, but it's very economical. You can get web development done. You can get e-commerce integration, apps with kind of the basic features that you need, as well as animated videos. And the last thing, of course, is you can look at working with local students to get some of these things done. The opportunities are pretty significant. I want to toss just this question at Mike. Mike, what have you seen anything specific that is really changing in terms of small business with what people are using right now?
Well, I think what you're talking about here is critically important. I think the key, though, is for most small business owners, they see this as sort of a black box or something that's complex. So rather than to, you know, go along the learning curve and be willing to be patient and figure these things out one piece at a time, there's a tendency to kind of throw up your arms and say, you know what, I don't know how this stuff works. I don't know how to do this. And I don't have, I don't know, you know, $25,000 to give to somebody else to do it for me. So there's a tendency to just kind of back off. And I think the key is, you know, find some small steps that you can take to get yourself moving in this direction. And then once you've accomplished that, it's a lot easier to take the next step. Because I think this is a very difficult threshold for a lot of business owners.
Thanks, Mike. And again, please do bring whatever questions you have. Some things to think about in that are no-touch payments. because we don't want to touch things right now. Zelle, Venmo, Tap, others are amazing, emerging. There's one that, and it's interesting that they're actually kind of regional. In Arizona and Texas, there's something called Cash App. So depending on what your reach is as a small business owner and what your market feels comfortable with, perhaps what they are already using, you can tap into these no-touch payment systems with your bank. And what's happened is that Zelle has opened up what they call their APIs. These are the interfaces to the app itself, or to the application, and so has Venmo. So what that means is that now you can integrate phone apps directly to Zelle, so that people don't have to to open up their banking app necessarily. So these things are emerging. These connections are being made, and they can offer a way for you to be able to capitalize on whether it's impulse purchases or just making it that much easier for your customers.
We have a lot of people that are using Venmo, and it's surprisingly easy. And of course, one of the benefits of it is, depending on a little bit larger amounts of money, you don't have so many delays where someone, like if you have a check and then you deposit the check and it's on hold and this and that, Venmo, that money is changing hands really quickly. That's a big advantage.
Right, that's really important. And what can also be interesting, and depending on whether you're B2C or B2B, working with your customers, particularly if you're B2B, to see what can be done to minimize your accounts receivable and get paid more quickly, could be useful. And some of those systems, now what's happening now is people are integrating these instant pay systems into their enterprise resource management and automated supply chain. So it might be worth considering pinging your customers, if you're B2B, about the possibility of using some of these systems, so that as soon as you invoice them, somebody can click a button and you get paid, rather than a 30, 60, or 90 day.
I think it's worth also stressing the effect of accounts receivable on the profit and loss and the cash flow of a business. We have some analysis tools that we use that specifically will quantify the effect of accounts receivable, and it's really surprising what a big effect it can have. So if using a payment system like this, for example, if you can reduce your average account receivable time from, say, whatever it is, let's say it's 10 days, and you cut it down to 7, you'll probably be shocked at how much of an effect that actually has on your profit. It's probably much more significant than you think it is.
And Mike, what do you think about offering discounts for reducing payment time? I mean, that's not, I know that may not be something you want to do routinely, but particularly right now, is that something, do you think that's risky for small businesses, or do you think it's worth at least doing an analysis?
Well, I think if you do the analysis the right way, you can get a very specific answer. So for example, if you find out that, say, 3 days of accounts receivable in your particular business model, let's say that's worth, I don't know, let's say it's worth $10,000, then it's pretty easy to calculate, whether the discount is worth it or not. So if the discount saves you 3 days and 3 days costs you $15,000, well, then you obviously don't want to discount it any more than $15,000 or less. So it is quantifiable, and that's an analysis that I would do before I would make any kind of decision like that.
Okay, thanks. So the next thing is, and this is probably where, if Felix is still on, definitely would love to have any comments and insight that you can share, is looking at the digital marketing. So when you look at that traditional funnel, right, when you think of the traditional funnel, it breaks down a little more when you think about digital marketing, because you're dealing with what is now jokingly called the attention economy. So you can basically put a dollar value on what a look is worth, typically, when you go through the whole analysis of how many looks it costs to get a lead, and how many of those leads convert. So when you think about this, you want to go through the traditional awareness, consideration, conversion process in your mind, but then you want to break it down in this farther way, where you look at ads, trends, look at storytelling posts. So a lot of this is dependent upon your time doing continuous engagement. So there are cadences that are optimal. There are for social media posting. For example, with LinkedIn, if you make a post, you want to make sure that you like it and that either somebody else or you yourself comment within an hour, because that puts it in a different category of posts in terms of how often it pops up in people's feeds. The same thing for website optimization and search engine optimization. Here, Cooler Insights collapse those two, but they're actually a little different. Depending on what your business is, how you set up that website, how you arrange the calls to action, how you provide the information, has to be optimized. And then search engine optimization is specifically trying to hack the Google algorithm, basically optimizing your own backlinking and a variety of metadata that's involved in how websites are set up, so that when somebody searches window installation Newark, you're the first one that pops up, as opposed to your four competitors being farther up. And then, of course, there is the storytelling and the blogs, and customer stories, which is the proof, the social proof that is provided. Then finally, when it comes to where you're driving these folks, really what you think of is, you think of social media here, and general outreach, ads, etc. Then as you come down the funnel, you're driving to tighter and tighter social media that's directly linking to somewhere where they can buy something. So that's either your app or your website. And there's a lot. It's a very deep subject. I could Mike and I, we could probably do a couple hours just on this. And we are happy to have you reach out if you are interested in more information. But in general, what you want to think of is this: social media leads to website, leads to apps, leads to, and these are the two places where you have the conversion. Any thoughts, Mike, on anything special you've seen, or businesses doing, or any things that are working particularly well right now during COVID?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's COVID related, but I would say certainly video is a very big piece of this. People want to see who they're going to be working with, what they're like, what their personality is. You know, very short videos, just a matter of a few minutes on a site, can really affect how people perceive you. I mean, we've all seen, I don't know about in the Bay Area, but in Arizona, there's like this frenzy of like commercials, for example, that have to do with like injury attorneys, you know, and you know, making them seem, you know, bigger than life heroes, and you know, they're tough, and you know, they have musical phone numbers and things like that. I mean, it seems kind of silly in a way, but it's obviously very effective because it helps people to remember who they are. And I think this is also a challenge for a lot of business owners, because they don't necessarily see themselves as being particularly photogenic or particularly interesting when they talk. But it's very worthwhile, because people want to know who they're dealing with. So I would, if you can do a short video, I would certainly recommend it.
You know, and that's super important. One thing that I will add on to that is that recently, in the general gestalt, particularly in the business world, marketing world, as you read some of these reports following different thought leadership. What's become clear is the dividing line in terms of how people respond to kind of generic ads versus authenticity. And even the gimmicky superhero stuff, because it's kind of gimmicky, it's funny, it's fun, it shows people don't take themselves too seriously, or even serious ones, videos where people look directly into the camera and make an appeal, particularly to support local business. The authenticity of this is actually really critical. There seems to be a fatigue in the market for the overproduced, polished testimonials with actors. The old joke that a marketing professor of mine said, where they would put a supermodel with a glove on the wrong hand next to a toilet bowl to sell things to people for their homes, and there's a fatigue for that. So as business owners, it's important to keep in mind that we are our business. So it's okay to go out there, even if we are not the most photogenic. Look at me, I'm doing webinars, and you know, you see it. So we'll move on.
I think you're very photogenic.
Thank you, Mike. He's also very kind. So this is a topic that is really, and these are questions, and I'm going to leave this up because I think we're going to go point by point through this, Mike. And this may be really some of the real meat of our discussion is finance during COVID, because I think this is on a lot of small business owners' minds. So Mike, these are some points from our discussions that you gave me. So I've put them up here, and perhaps we can just take them one by one. So the first thing that we talked about readiness for loans, credit, and finance. Can you perhaps talk about your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So originally, when the COVID-19 federal programs came out, there was an anticipation that you would have to have some fairly robust financial statements in order to show, you know, what your need for the EIDL loans, that's the emergency injury disaster relief money, and the PPP loans as well. But what happened is they ended up kind of simplifying the process, because I think they realized they were overburdened, and they really didn't have the bandwidth to really look over those applications as seriously as they would need to. So it turned out that you really didn't need to have the kind of documentation that you would want somebody actually to have to apply for a loan. But even so, moving forward, those requirements might come back. Plus, there's a lot of local, state, other programs that at the very least, in order to qualify, they want to see in numbers how COVID has affected you. So for example, we have one local grant fund that in their application, you need to show a profit and loss statement for, I believe it's April, May, and June of 2019 against a profit and loss statements for April, May, and June 2020. So you can prove that it's affected you by more than 25% in order to qualify for the funds. So obviously, if you don't have your numbers together, you can't do that. I mean, it's good practice to have this stuff anyway, but it might be critically important now in order to qualify for future COVID funding.
Right. So my understanding is that California itself does have some programs available, but that these are somewhat complex. So Mike, I mean, can you comment on how, you know, that's the second point, is don't give up on the loan applications, whether you might have gotten denied the first time. I think you mentioned you can reapply, and some of these are getting a little complex with the state programs, just because they seem to have just a different level of complexity. What is your advice to small business owners in that regard?
Yeah, see, there's a lot of COVID money that is funneling through state governments and local governments as well, aside from the from the big federal programs, the EIDL money and the PPP money. And those are being done differently in different places, different localities. But generally speaking, the larger the program is, the federal programs being the largest, the more likely they are to have problems processing the volume of applications that they get, and frankly, not having enough expertise to properly evaluate them. So what we saw, particularly with the EIDL loans, was that people would just get rejected, and they would get a very minimal reason why. Some of them, would say you didn't show sufficient harm by the COVID crisis. Well, there was really very little place on the application to even show that in the first place. So a lot of it was very subjective.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Can you just, for those of us who may not know, define what EIDL is?
So again, that was the federal program. That's emergency injury, disaster, emergency injury disaster loans.
And that was separate from the PPP, the yes. Special, yeah, okay, right. Great.
The EIDL is handled specifically by a special group within the federal government. It's important to understand that got off the ground quickly because it already existed. However, it already existed in a much smaller format. The purpose of EIDL for decades has been to help small businesses in localized disasters. So these are things like tornado damage, floods, hurricanes, significant but local. So typically the EIDL people were only looking at maybe 3, 4, perhaps 5,000 applications at a time, depending if it was a big hurricane. Well, under the COVID, that volume jumped up to like 8 or 10 million. So they were totally unprepared for that. And that's why the EIDL program has been pretty much a mess. We've seen everything happen, including applications getting rejected for whatever reason we don't know. But yes, I mean, if you didn't think you got rejected for a legitimate reason, it was worth resubmitting. They're handling the volume pretty well right now because the majority of businesses that applied for EIDL loans got them, or were denied for specific reasons that the business owner is aware of and legitimately feels that they see why they're not qualified. So the number of resubmissions is not anywhere near the threshold of the original submissions, and they seem to be getting, taken care of in a reasonable amount of time. So we're talking weeks versus months.
Yeah, thank you. So on that subject, in terms of different loans, there's the other thing is to think of non-government as well and non-bank. So there are loans that are subsidized by companies such as FedEx Small Business Grants. There is the what's it called? Sorry, I had it in my notes. The Opportunity Fund, which is assistance for small businesses owners affected by COVID-19. It's called the Opportunity Fund. There's also the Center for Culture Innovation, CCI, that has a relief fund for artists and cultural practitioners. So that depending on what your small business does, you may qualify for that. And there is also the Women's Foundation California, which has a relief and resilience fund and women-owned small businesses can apply to that. So that's just a small highlight of some of these non-PPP, non-EIDL programs that people don't necessarily know about, and that honestly don't do a great job of promoting themselves. So they may be being missed by our local small business owners. So it's important to cast a wide net because there is a lot of relief out there, but you do have to go through the motions in terms of do an application and also do some searching to find it.
Right. I'd certainly recommend the local small business development centers, SCORE, um, the city's economic development departments. A lot of them are aware of a lot of these, but you're right. Some of them that are more obscure because it's a particular non-for-profit. Yeah, it may not be that well known, but understand that organizations like that, they certainly don't have much of, if any, advertising budget. So the only way they can really get the word out is probably through, social media, Facebook pages, and so forth. So it's certainly worth your while to go online, do all kinds of Google searches, Facebook, things like that, and find these organizations and see if they're offering money, because a lot of them are. We've had some clients that are pretty clever, and they've done a pretty good job of getting $10,000 here, $5,000 there. The only thing though is you got to be careful, because some of these programs have parameters that limit the amount of COVID-related funding you're entitled to. So for example, I'm aware of one in Arizona that if you got like $10,000 or $15,000 in EIDL money, then you don't qualify to get a grant through them, because they don't want people piling up grant money. So you have to be careful about that.
And then, so when it comes to how to get a loan, the next question that's on so many people's minds is, are these loans indeed going to be forgiven, or are we taking on debt that we may not really have an understanding of how we are going to pay down over the next 8 quarters, for example, fiscal quarters?
Yeah, that's a good question. So most of the smaller local programs have, for the most part, what I've seen is they're grant programs. So they're giving you the money without any expectation of it being paid back. Of course, that's the difference between a grant and a loan. So, this is really unprecedented. Normally, small businesses don't have much opportunity to get grant money. I have to say, as someone who's worked in SBDC networks for a long time, the most common question we ever get from a business owner is, where do I get free money from? And they'll say, like, well, I'm in a minority, but I'm opening up a pizza restaurant. Well, that's great, but it doesn't matter how many minorities you belong to, you're not going to get a grant for a pizza restaurant. However, under the COVID now, there's grants being thrown around all over the place. So obviously, if you get a grant, you don't have to worry about, having a debt on your books. As far as the PPP funding is concerned, I really would think that most businesses should be able to get that forgiven. There's probably a very high likelihood right now that if the amount of your PPP loan was under 150,000, you might not even have to really try to get it forgiven. I think they're going to find out that they don't have the bandwidth to look at those forgiveness applications, and I think they're just going to carte blanche forgive everything that's under $150,000. Now, that's not certain, but I think there's a probability that's going to happen. And in which case, the business owner, all they're going to have to do is basically sign off on some sort of document that says, I used the PPP money the way I was supposed to, thank you very much, and sign their name to it. I think for larger PPP for forgiveness, I think a majority of those are going to be forgiven, because those are larger businesses that should have a better handle on their finances. They probably have, a fairly good number of employees, and because the period for that was extended from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, I think a lot of those businesses will effectively have properly used that money for that employee expense. And if they haven't, they've made alterations to it over time as well, so that the non-employee portion that can be forgiven has expanded from 25% to 40%, and the acceptable uses of the funds have also expanded to include all kinds of utilities and rent and things like that. So I would say, if you're a fairly smart business person, you should be able to get that PPP loan forgiven. And again, if it's under 150,000, I think the odds are very high that they're just going to carte blanche forgive all of them.
Thanks. There's a question from Richard. He asks, are PPP loans still available? This three-part. How must a forgiven PPP loan, or perhaps a forgiven loan in general, be declared for taxes? Is that earned income?
The PPP program has ended. I believe the last date for a bank to submit for a SBA loan number, I believe it was August 8th. So it is done. As far as the taxes are concerned, it is not taxable, but there are some kind of gray areas that have not been perfectly figured out about that the funds aren't taxable, but then if you use the funds for employee expenses that would normally be taxable, those might not be, because the assumption would be that you're getting a double tax break. So there was a rather large fight about that, I believe, between the Treasurer Mnuchin and Congress, and I don't think that has been fully vetted out yet. So I don't know if that there is a clear answer on that at this point. I would say though that
you're still paying payroll taxes, right?
Right, but I guess the point is, what things that would normally be tax deductible, are they still tax deductible when you've been given the money to pay for them? That's the question. Because in essence, you'd be kind of double dipping, because you're taking a tax break on something that you didn't even pay for in the first place.
Right. Okay. So there could be some minutia there, but it's not going to be called. Yeah. It's not going to be considered earned income.
Right. And there's still lots of little voids in the PPP. Over time, we found all kinds of inconsistencies and things that aren't clearly defined. I mean, this is going to happen. It takes a long time to completely vet a program and figure out everything that could be, happening when you have so many different businesses with so many different business models. There's always going to be situations where what would seem to be advantageous in some particular circumstance turns out to be not advantageous. So the jury is still out on that. And then if and when they come up with a PPP Part 2, who knows what that may entail. I'm sure they're going to make some changes compared to the first one, if nothing else, to make sure that there's no, bad publicity from what are really large companies taking PPP money that shouldn't be. That was a PR disaster, and they cannot let that happen again.
A follow-up question from Jonathan is, likewise, if you receive a grant, say through one of these nonprofits, for example, is that going to be counted as income, or would there be some sort of way to declare it as COVID relief, even though it did not come through the PPP or EIDL program?
Right. My guess is that when they figure out the tax forms for 2020, and boy, that's going to be some task, because there's going to be all kinds of things that need to be accounted for on these tax returns that have never been done before. But my presumption would be that COVID-related grants, you would presume, would not be taxed, because that would obviously defeat a lot of the purpose of getting the money in the first place. But I can't say for sure, but I think the intention would be that, that money is emergency relief type money, and as such, it should not be subjected to taxes.
Richard asked, the disaster loan is not a grant. No, I don't think, no, because it's a loan. A grant implies, right, that it doesn't have to be paid back, and these things are being issued as loans right now.
It's actually both. So
Oh,
idle
that's
has,
confusing.
yeah, idle had two pieces to it. So there
Mm,
was what was the idle advance, which was a grant, and then the idle loan, which is a loan. The grant was an upfront payment anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000, depending on how many employees you had. So, but that money, you don't have to, there was no paperwork required other than the application. You get the money, that's it, not to be paid back. But then in addition to that, then if you were offered an idle loan, it is going to be paid back. However, the terms were spectacular for a small business loan. You're looking at what 2.75% amortized over 30 years, and your first payment wasn't even due until it had been funded for 12 months. So that's a long time. I mean, hopefully by the time the 12 months is up, you might even just give the money back and not have a loan at all. But if you do, you couldn't ask for better terms on a business loan than that.
And so looking forward, you mentioned that there may be a PPP Part 2. And how do you think what shape do you think that might take, particularly aimed towards small business, and also with idle? Are there still opportunities to get that, or do you think it'll be interesting moving forward, that they'll fund idle as well?
I think the PPP, I think it has a high likelihood of coming into play. That program actually ran relatively smoothly. And I think it was pretty successful in that it really did help to preserve a lot of jobs. I think the wrinkle in a PPP Part 2 is there may be a lot of lenders that went through Part 1 and choose not to do it. So I have a sense that even if the program comes into play, the number of banks that are willing to participate will be a lot fewer than they were the first time around. But that doesn't mean that there won't be enough of them doing it, that you can't take advantage of the program. But I don't think it'll be nearly as widely received among the banks as the first one was.
I see. There's a question from Ann Stedler, and Ann is the Economic Development Officer for the City of Newark. So thank you, Ann, for joining us. She asks, Mike, realizing that we're in uncharted times, what do you see as the key issue or issues small businesses face in the months ahead, especially when they have exhausted their PPP? And do you define that horizon as through March 2021 or a full 12 months to August 2021?
Sorry, hold on just a second. Sorry about that. Sorry, I got a little distracted. My dog went crazy.
No problem. Shall I ask the question again?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Yeah, of course. So in these uncharted times, what do you see as a key issue or issues small businesses face in the months ahead, especially when they've exhausted PPP loans they may have received? And do you define that horizon as March 2021, basically the end of Q1 2021, or all the way to 12 months from now, August 2021?
Wow, that's a big question. I think the reality is that we're going to see a sizable number of businesses just flat out fail. It's not what we want to see. That's obviously not our desire. It's not our job to help businesses go out of business. But I think we have to be realistic that that's probably going to happen. I know in the one thing that I've been brushing up on a lot, which is kind of sad to say, is that exit strategies for companies. If you don't have a lot of assets, you're kind of likely to go out of business. How do you evaluate what you have left and what would be its value, to somebody else? Again, it's not a pretty picture, but it's something that a lot of businesses are just going to frankly have to consider. You know, and of course, it's very dependent on the industry that you're in as well. You know, if you're in an industry that you've been effectively closed down, then, you know, all the strategizing in the world isn't going to do you any good if you just don't have any opportunity to bring in revenue. So, I mean, clearly the businesses that have, you know, the strongest cash position are probably the ones that are likely to do the best. But I think what we're going to be seeing is, I think we're going to be seeing a period, frankly, of a lot of businesses going under. But entrepreneurs being what they are, they will find a way to regroup and start something new. So I think there's going to be a flurry of new businesses, ones that replace businesses that, because of whatever their business model was, just cannot succeed in a COVID environment. They're going to come up with some other business model that will succeed. And I think so eventually, you know, it'll take its place. But I know that sounds kind of dire, but I think that's just the reality of it, because it doesn't matter if they have another PPP or 2 more PPPs or another EIDL or, you know, a local grant for $10,000. I mean, those things, they're just bandages, you know, on a much bigger problem. They are not a solution. They're just a stopgap. And the stopgaps are fine, I guess, you know, for 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, but that's not going to work for a year. So, you know, it's really anybody's guess. I mean, it's going to be survival of the fittest.
So cash is going to be king, is what it sounds like. But
yeah, I mean,
at some level, we knew that. Yeah,
cash always was king, but yeah, for sure. And then, you know, as a business owner, you have to ask yourself as well, okay, let's say I have a strong cash position, but if I'm in an industry that, you know, just doesn't look like it has a future, just because I can afford to stay in business doesn't necessarily mean that I should. I don't know, I'm just going to throw in an example, you know, a buffet restaurant. I mean, you know, the restaurant business is hit so hard as it is, you know, if a buffet restaurant, I would think, you know, would be just extremely difficult, you know, or, you know, any kind of entertainment environment that by nature, you know, forces people to be close together and, you know, competing together and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there are just some industries that, you know, really may not come back for a long time unless there's an effective vaccine. So that, you know, that's very hard to predict.
A follow-up question is, are there microloan providers that we should be introducing in our community?
That's an interesting question, because I've been promoting microloan programs quite a lot. Here's the issue with microloan programs is this. A lot of, and again, this is just my opinion on this, but I've seen a number of communities that launched microloan programs, but they didn't really feel that they had the bandwidth or expertise to manage those programs on their own. So they took the money, handed it off to a financial institution to have them run it for them. But I see that as intrinsically not going to work, because financial institutions are designed to have certain processes for making loans. They're extremely risk averse. And most of the people, or the small businesses, as I should say, that you would want to qualify for the microloans, the bank is likely to reject them. So I've seen a couple programs here in Arizona that happened exactly like that, where, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars available for microloans, but only a handful of them get funded because on paper, the recipients just don't look good enough. So I think in order for a microloan program to be successful, there has to be a much more in-depth way of evaluating who you should loan the money to, with the understanding that a lot of them on paper will not look good, and they're not going to get a loan from the bank, which is why they should get the microloan in the first place.
So it's kind of, so that's a tension. Is there a role in government to local government to ease that tension, perhaps, or is that something that is going to be governed primarily by the banks?
Well, I would say I would like to see local governments take this on, because it's not as complicated as they think it is, in my opinion. But that's because I have a micro loan lending background. But again, I think, you know, most most municipalities or counties, I think they just don't feel that they have the bandwidth and the expertise to handle it, and it's a lot easier for them to hand it off to a bank. But again, that sounds good, but the reality is it doesn't give you the result that you want.
Very interesting. So before we move on from finance, I want to just pause for a moment and ask folks to please chime in with any more questions. No, this has been on the topic of a lot of folks' minds. Wonder if we've exhausted people a little bit.
I know. I mean, it's a very tedious topic. That's the reality.
Anything that we didn't cover, Mike, that you feel small businesses need to be thinking about or know right now?
I would say one thing with regard to the marketing. I think it's very important that if you, especially if you have a retail establishment that's open, you need to make it very clear to the public that you are doing everything that you're supposed to make your establishment as safe as possible. I'm aware of a couple municipalities that have actually put together sort of a uniform system of vinyl banners that the businesses are able to put out in front that say, you know, we adhere to the CDC standards, and they have, you know, like little icons of, like, I don't know, like, for example, they test their employees every time they come in, you know, to make sure they have a body temperature below 100.4, that they provide social distancing, all of these things. I think that's very important because people want to know that if they are a patron of this establishment, that they're not endangering their health. So that's a very, very important thing for businesses to make really, really clear. And to do it in some sort of signage, I think, is a very good idea.
Thank you. Anything else on finance before we move on to a couple of other topics? Okay, there are a couple more topics that we have. One was thinking about how to monetize in new ways. And again, please do chime in. So one thing to think about is offering discounts for extra value for future services purchased now. There have been case studies that are being published about businesses using to very good effect, offering 10, 15, or 15%, basically eliminating some margin on money that that they receive now through the sale of gift cards for services after a certain date, say after January 1st, 2021. Another successful tactic that's being used is offering value packs. I know a couple of physical therapy services that have sold massage packs at a significant discount, but again, only redeemable after a certain amount of time. Other businesses are subleasing space and turning it into a different SaaS model, this time space as a service, so that people can meet with cleaning in between as the value that they're adding, so that people have confidence in that meeting space. And then it's kind of interesting. There is a fatigue. Perhaps we all feel it. I should have had 2 glasses of water. There is perhaps a fatigue that we're all feeling to Zoom and RingCentral and webinars. So in-person meetings, people want to do them, but how do you do them? So that might be another thing people can consider. Another one is considering ways to leverage, lease, or otherwise monetize capital assets. Kitchens, restaurants are leasing out their kitchens to food delivery services so that they at least have some revenue coming in from that, even if they can't afford to stay open for general customers. Mike, any thoughts on kind of those business model tweaks, particularly in terms of payments and the delivering of value?
Yeah, I mean, if you can get, anytime that you can get somebody to pay for something now that they're going to get later, that's obviously a good strategy. I guess the only thing I would say about that is the consumer has got to have a high level of trust that they're going to be able to cash in on that, next year, and you won't be out of business. But with regard to the subleasing of space, this brings up a topic that's really quite interesting. In areas where there's some shortage of office space, or where office space is very expensive, the number of companies that are going to be either relinquishing office space or trying to get somebody else to sublease their office space is going to create a great opportunity for small businesses that would like to have that kind of professional space, but either couldn't afford it before, or there just wasn't availability in the first place. So that's a wonderful opportunity for a small business that, for whatever reason, is not as highly affected by the pandemic because of the business that they happen to be in. But now, well, not right now, but later in the year, we'll have an opportunity to obtain space at a price that before they would have never imagined they could have gotten.
Very interesting. There was a question about the close versus stay open decision that you mentioned a few minutes ago, and the question asks, do you or SBDC experts have any recorded seminars or literature that is available to help people explore that decision and make sure that they are, whatever they do, that they fully understand everything so that they can make the best decision for their business?
That's you know what, I think there are a number of those in the works right now. I think historically that is not the kind of seminar or the kind of subject matter that was worth putting that kind of effort into. But obviously, under the current situation, I think it is. I can't say for sure which SBDCs have tackled this and which ones have not, but I would, check with your local SBDC, maybe some other ones virtually. But if that doesn't exist, my guess is it probably will exist in the relatively near future, because, again, it's not a pretty topic, but businesses need direction on this, and it's up to the service providers to offer that.
Thank you. So another thing to consider, and this is again something that's very deep, so that we're just putting this in folks' mind and providing them some ideas, is in terms of how to optimize operations. And what I show here is a very traditional value stream map, where you see basically your inputs to your business, what you do, and then how you deliver that to the customer. This exact format can also be used for customer interactions or customer journeys. For example, thinking about where the customer enters into the interactions with you and then leaves having received something of value, and ideally somewhere around here having given you some cash. And so looking at this, what you see is that you have active time and waits There are possibly different inputs to this. This is a very simplistic one. But the bottom line is what this does is this is looking at your operation in detail, as much detail as you can bear to put into it. So things to consider are reviewing your operation for where you can improve response time, new opportunities to deliver value, opportunities to upsell, and how you can pivot. And Mike, I'm going to toss it back over to you to comment on this concept of optimizing operations, and particularly thinking about, expanding wallets and also pivoting. What thoughts do you have, or what insights have you found in the last few months with working at small businesses?
That word pivot, that's the key word. People are throwing around the word pivot like never before, because for the most part, businesses have got to pivot. And that's easier for some businesses than others. So, if you've got, let's say you have 5, valid revenue streams, and COVID has, decimated 2 of them, well, then obviously you're going to focus on the other 3. That's pretty much a no-brainer. But then you have other businesses that, COVID has been just devastating, and pivoting is a little easier said than done. But I know for one example I can think of is in restaurant retail, a lot of restaurants that had never really embraced the idea of carryout or delivery found ways to do it, and they put together packages, and they found it to be surprisingly successful. And I think they're going to be able to carry that through to the future. One that I'm thinking of is like a Brazilian steakhouse concept. So if you think about the way a restaurant like that works, that's one of the ones where you get the, they come around, you get the kind of endless meat. Well, clearly that does not lend itself anywhere nearly as good to delivery as a Chinese restaurant would, which is probably primarily based on delivery from the get-go. But they found ways to put together packages at probably a somewhat reduced price. They instead of getting as much as you want of 10 kinds, maybe there's only 5 kinds, and you get a certain quantity of each one, whatever. Which is not what they intended to do, but they've done it, and they put together these packages, and it's been relatively successful. So, that's a kind of an example of where you have pivoted to something a little bit different. Obviously, reducing your costs is always something that's optimal. But at this point, it may be just a question of survival. If you can't cut your costs enough, you might not be able to survive if your revenue has been drastically reduced.
Well, another example, and I think Anne may have heard me mention this previously, is a manufacturer of upholstery, furniture upholstery. And furniture at some level kind of fits into the higher end goods market, which is pretty harshly affected right now. And what they did is they actually converted their production systems, because they know how to handle fabric of different types, how to handle stitching. They actually pivoted to making masks. And they managed, they took some PPP money to kind of bridge that conversion, and they have managed, because it took them 2 months to convert, and that was quite impressive. And then another 2 months to get the certifications they needed to sell certified masks. And so they used PPP to bridge them through that, but they managed to not lay off a single person by doing that out of the 50 that they employ. So they're perhaps not so small. Maybe they're getting into the medium, but it's still, to me, that was instructive in thinking about pivoting and kind of all doing like a capability and skills matrix, but pulling it really far back to like the core of what you can do, and looking around as to how you can leverage that to provide value that may be in demand.
Right, and I think businesses that thought that they had to have a hands-on experience in order to operate, are coming to realize that they have to find some way of selling their product virtually, delivering it somehow, whatever, that, even when this is over, there's going to be, the habit will have been, heavily ingrained that, I want to buy everything from home. I've been doing it for the last year and I'm going to keep doing it. It's going to take a lot to get people to do things in person that they always used to. So you've got to be able to adapt to that no matter what it is you're selling, especially if it's a consumer type of service or item, you've got to make it so that people can do it virtually because that's what they're going to be used to doing.
So going to the next topic, and that's a great segue, is building customer confidence. And some things to think about are possibly publishing your process, depending on what you do. If you're delivering something physical to the customer, perhaps you could use live webcams to show that there is extreme adherence to equipment standards and best practices by your team. If it's something where you have to be in person, the right ambiance can matter. Everything from distancing to having an air filter going in the room. And then finally, the concept of promoting the use cases for your services or products during COVID to help people understand that there is still value to what you're presenting during this pandemic. Mike, what are your thoughts on
that? Yeah, as I had mentioned earlier on, if you want someone to physically come into your establishment, you need to make it very clear through signage or however you want to do it that no one is taking any kind of unnecessary risk by coming into your establishment. I know I feel confident if I walk into a restaurant and it's very clear, which tables are not in use. There's signs up, you must have a mask. If you don't have a mask, they provide you one. These things are critical that the customers feel safe in your establishment. As far as webcams and online discussions, things like that. The only thing about that this is just a personal observation is, as someone who is spending the majority of my career life doing stuff like what I'm doing right now, when I'm not doing this, I probably want to do anything I can to not be in front of a computer, because we're all getting just completely worn out from, Zoom meetings and things on the computer. So, if you're going to communicate with your clients this way, it better be really engaging, because, I, for one, am getting pretty weary of it, and it better be something worth my time, or I'm not going to do it.
Great. And then another.
Do you feel that way? Z, you go to a million meetings like this. It wears on you, does it not?
It is tiresome, but part of it is, I think, also having to be. It's hard. It's harder to stay engaged when interacting with the screen rather than when interacting with people.
Right.
I think so. I think a lot of it is also just fatigue from forcing yourself to pay attention to something that even when people watch TV or a movie, right, your mind wanders, you kind of flit in and out, and so on. But on this screen, when it comes to business and work, you have to be tight. Right. The next concept was reimagining the customer experience. I used a restaurant as an example. Things you can affect are layout, movement, airflow, disinfection, and of course the delivery of the product. I think we've covered a lot of this, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, especially as we're coming to the end of the hour. But another concept I wanted to mention was bringing back the house call. So you're seeing here, we've got a picture from Southern California of a mobile hair salon where these folks go to you. You get into that van, and that van is a single chair hair salon. They've got everything they need, and they're providing a mask, they're cleaning, they're showing you how it's cleaned. So bringing back the house call. Now, this does put you as the small business owner a little more at risk. So procedures and protective equipment are extremely critical. But at the same time, it could possibly be a way, if your business model can tolerate it, to fundamentally keep your customer base engaged with you, and also possibly, if your competitors are not employing this model, to poach their customers. When I spoke with one mobile hair salon owner, what she told me was that about a half of her existing clientele was not comfortable still, but what happened was that she ended up overbooked and overprescribed because she had so many new clients coming in, people who wanted this service, who she had never seen, she'd never worked with before, but found out about her and said, hey, you know, my provider is closed, but I still want this service, so I'm going to go with you. Another thing, this sounds trivial, but I needed to get my bike tuned up, and I ended up convincing the guy here to take care of me within 4 days. And he said, look, if you didn't know me, the wait now to get your bike tuned up is 2 weeks, whereas before it might just be a couple days. So it's really it's really interesting to think about that there are businesses where people still want those services, and if there was a mobile bike tune-up guy that would bring his truck over, park outside of my driveway, and take care of it, that's something that I would go for very easily.
I think this has a lot of legs even beyond the COVID pandemic, because we have an aging population in this country, and while some people may be using this during COVID, and then when COVID is over, either won't or don't care about it, you still have, you know, a lot of people who have a need for this. Again, elderly Americans in particular, and as that population continues to grow, the demand for this is going to grow as well. So maybe in this case, COVID kind of kickstarted it into high gear, but it will have longevity even beyond the pandemic.
That's a really interesting point, to think about how the pivots that businesses make now might actually be critical for their even longer term survival as demographics change. There's an interesting point that Anne makes. She writes, let's drill down on right ambiance. She thinks that means maintaining customer welcome and service despite COVID. But are there other takes on that? Mike, just kind of going back to you know, some of the ideas you had, what do you think about that?
I don't know. You know, that's a tough question. I think you know, proving that you're adhering to all the CDC guidelines and so forth is part of that. But maybe the question is getting to the point of, you know, are we, you know, is it still going to be enjoyable to be a patron at these places that, you know, you're communicating with people in masks, you know, the tables are far apart, you know, it's hard to socialize, if and when, bars reopen, what is that going to be like? I mean, what's the point? What would it be the ambiance of going to a bar if you have to wear a mask and you effectively can't talk to somebody that you don't know because they're more than 6 feet away from you? I don't know. I think, it's kind of ingenuity is going to probably figure out a way to work on this, because I think it is a good question, because if you're doing everything that you're supposed to do, do you kind of make it so that the experience is so, I don't know, not comfortable enough that you even want to do it?
That's interesting to think about. It puts me in mind of something that a friend said to me recently, that we were lucky to not be single during COVID. And I just imagine that this is a bit of a rough time for that. So I'm sure that there's going to be a bunch of movies made about cutesy romance movies about how people engineered their romances during COVID. I guess we can wait for that. Now Richard has raised his hand, and so Richard, please go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question if you have one.
I appreciate that, Zahir. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Zahir. I cannot tell you how many reminders that you brought up throughout this entire webinar of our experience going through COVID. I'm a grocery store. We were open the entire time, and I think that so many times that I stepped through and fumbled through many of the steps that you're providing information on right now would have been so valuable back then. And I think that this is going to be so valuable going forward for any businesses that are going to be opening up or reopening up during this COVID situation. One of the things that I think was most resonated with me was about, as far, you can call it ambience, you can call it about the social media aspect, about the short little videos, letting everybody know what was going on. My Facebook page is probably filled with me bumbling through, trying to let our customers know that we're not going to be out of everything and that we're going to be okay. And it's okay, everybody, come on in. We're going to be okay. We'll take care of you. This is what we're doing. We're practicing 6-foot distance. We're trying to do one-way aisles. We're making sure we're sanitizing everything. So all of the things that you spoke about in the seminar really, really made a huge difference. And I got a lot of feedback and a lot of positive reaction from our customers that they were seeing those things. So thank you for bringing these things here. And Mike, I cannot tell you how truthful everything that you guys did was. But right now we are still doing well at our store. Obviously we have staffing issues because that's the new thing that we have. But I think that everything that you guys talked about, including all the way through the PPP loans, I think that every small business has gone through every phase of this, and it's stressed us out, and we can't thank you more than what just being say thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, folks, thank you, Richard. We're at the end of our hour. I'll close with some reminders. You can and will get through this. It will not last indefinitely. You've got to adapt. Customer confidence is critical. Focusing on market operations and new ways of doing business is more important than ever. People talk about innovation. It's funny, people have been talking about the future is now for 10 years and not much changed. And then COVID hits us and everything changes suddenly. But the fundamentals don't. Business model and marketing. So focus on that is critical. Get help where you need it. People like Mike, whose contact information through his consulting firm will share on the Newark Chamber of Commerce website, in case you wanted to reach out to him. I'm going to put my email address up here just in a second. So you reach out to get help from where you need it, and leverage your fellow businesses. Richard is a local grocery store proprietor. So there are lessons learned, and maybe we'll harangue him into giving a presentation about his journey through this time, and what he learned from it, what we'll leave behind, and what is going to be important moving forward. But leveraging your business community, being here with the Chamber of Commerce, and networking and reaching out through the Chamber of Commerce is something that will enable you to find and explore new ways of moving forward. So thank you all very much. From the Newark Chamber of Commerce, I'm Zahir Ali. With me today has been Mike Cohen. And we appreciate your attendance. And as we move forward, we're going to be doing this seminar series bi-monthly, so the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. And we're going to be hosting some amazing speakers. On the docket is a webinar and conversation with the County Health Department. There's also going to be a discussion about healthcare and specifically mental health during COVID. So those are just a few highlights to look forward to, and we look forward to seeing you again in September. Thank you all very much. I'm going to keep the line open for another few minutes in case there are any last questions, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Good luck, everybody, with your electricity.
Yeah, hey, it's still on. Hooray!
Yeah, good. Good for you.
Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye. Any last questions or comments? Happy to stay on for a couple minutes if folks have anything. All right. Well, thank you all so very much. We'll see you next time.
Bye.